Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined as always by our producer, Thomas Dye. Today we're continuing our conversation with Dr. Robert Salem, a pioneering surgeon who was very instrumental in establishing cardiovascular surgery here in Lubbock. Dr. Salem, thanks again for being with us today. Last week we talked about your background and your education and your training with Dr. Michael DeBakey and Dr. Denton Cooley in Houston. We'll spend this program talking about how you returned to Lubbock and your efforts in establishing general surgery and also cardiovascular surgery here and other contributions that you've made to the Lubbock community. So welcome.
Thank you again, Gordon. When I arrived in Lubbock, I was one of the few trained surgeons doing the kind of surgery that I was trained to do in Houston. I had an interest in general surgery, all phases of general surgery, cancer surgery, trauma surgery, even pediatric surgery, and particularly peripheral vascular surgery. What that means, all the arteries in the body except the heart. I did, for example, the first abdominal aortic aneurysm surgery, replacing the abdominal aorta and the aneurysm with a synthetic Dacron artery, the Dacron that Dr. DeBakey made several years earlier. The cardiologists at the time weren't even doing heart caths. Of course, that is a prerequisite to doing any type of heart surgery. You've got to have a cardiology department that knows how to do heart catheterizations. So for several years, I just did the general and the peripheral vascular surgery. And then in the early in 1970, Dr. Sam King and Dr. Joe Arrington, Dr. Sam King was the lead cardiologist, performed the first cardiac cath in West Texas. And then later on in the year, they were doing many of these caths, and they were finding lesions in the coronary artery that needed surgery. And they came to me, knowing I had trained in Houston, where it all began, about setting up an open heart surgery in Lubbock. And I was intrigued by that and talked to Dr. DeBakey about it. And he said, well, in the meantime, I had talked to Dr. Bricker about coming out and joining me and starting up the program. And he had agreed to do so if we could put everything in place we needed to do. So I talked to Dr. DeBakey, can we start up an open heart surgical program in a town of 120,000 and one main hospital with 200 beds? I said, no. He said, well, nobody's ever done it before, but he said, it can be done. And I said, you and Dr. Bricker can manage the surgical piece, but there are a dozen other things just as important. For example, you've got to have an experienced heart-lung machine, experienced technician that knows how to run the heart-lung. It's a pump, knows how to run the pump. You've got to have experienced cardiologists in cardiac surgery, anesthesia, pulmonologists. You got to have a lab up in the operating room because you have to check the blood all during the surgery because you give blood thinners and you want to keep it at the right level. If you give too much, the patient bleeds to death. If it's not enough, clots form. Same result. So we've spent months, Don Bricker and I did, on putting all these pieces together. And then we felt like we could do this. But we had resistance from some people. For example, some of the doctors on the staff were against it because some of the other surgeons in particular, because they felt like you're going to come in here and do this kind of big surgery and you're going to use up all our operating resources and use up all of our blood. It's going to affect our schedule and our lives and our ability to do our thing. And then even some of the board members said, to us that, you can't do this kind of surgery in this town, in this setting, because it's never been done before, and they were right. But my main impetus was simply to provide this kind of service to the people of West Texas, because prior to that, they had to go pack up to go to Houston and Dallas and Denver, where they were doing this kind of surgery, and it's such a tremendous financial and emotional sacrifice on the part of the families that I wanted to be able to provide that service to the people of West Texas and eastern New Mexico. So after we got all the pieces in place, the cardiologist, Dr. King, and Dr. Arrington help us select the proper patient to start with. We didn't want anybody real seriously ill or any patient whose expectancy wasn't real good, because we wanted to have a younger patient with a younger heart, and chances for success are better. So we selected a patient, 25-year-old lady who had a hole in her heart and between the upper two auricles, and operated on her this day. This was in November 1970, and had to put a large patch on this hole in between the two auricles. It was a very successful operation. She had an uncomplicated course, and still living today, if you can imagine. Lady from Levelland. So that was the beginning of heart surgery. But if I go back to the first heart cath, that's really what started, because without the cath, we couldn't have the surgery. So it was a combination of heart caths early on by Dr. King, and then Dr. Bricker and I doing this heart surgery in 1970 in November. Now then, at the time, there was only one heart surgical program. It was there at Methodist. It grew rapidly because there were nobody doing surgery in entire West Texas and eastern New Mexico. We had patients from all over eastern New Mexico, from Amarillo, from Abilene, and all over. And we grew that program so fast you wouldn't believe. We had to increase the operating rooms. Dr. Bricker recruited other heart surgeons, and then later on, that one program split because a lot of the doctors, surgeons and cardiologists split out from Methodist to form the Heart Hospital. And then in the meantime, the medical school developed a surgical program, heart surgical program. So today, we have 3 good places where you can get heart surgery.
But when you originally grew the program at Methodist, you and Dr. Bricker and that team, that became the 3rd largest program in the state?
Absolutely, it did. We started out with that one case in 1970. Because of our large referral volume, over time, we built that into the 3rd largest volume of cases in the country. Second behind, Dr. DeBakey still had the biggest program. Dr. Cooley had the 2nd. Methodist Hospital Lubbock had the 3rd largest. That's right, absolutely. And we did as many as 1,200 open heart cases per year. That's 100 a month. That's 3 or 4 a day.
That's an amazing growth pattern.
It really is.
As you said, coming to a community with 120,000 people and a 200-bed hospital.
Absolutely is.
Dr. DeBakey was right that it could be done.
Yes.
And you and your team were the folks to do it. We'll take a quick break here. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for any future guest on Archive West Texas, please send us an email at info@classical1057.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation today with Dr. Robert Salem. Dr. Salem, in our last segment, we talked about you coming to Lubbock and basically taking a community of 120,000 with a 200-bed hospital, establishing both general surgery and cardiovascular surgery teams, and growing that to one of the largest practices, cardiovascular operations in the nation. In addition to your work in surgery and as a physician, you've been very instrumental in helping establish and grow the Texas Tech University School of Medicine. Take us back to how that started and your role in that process.
Yes, thank you, Gordon. Yes, I've been involved with the medical school since its very beginning. I came to Lubbock and started my practice in 1962. In the mid-'60s, I was approached by President Grover Murray and Vice President Bill Parsley about the school's effort to obtain a medical school. And they wanted to know if I would help them support that sort of representing the private practice medical community. I had leadership roles at both Methodist Hospital and in the Medical Society, and of course I was very interested in that. I thought, what a wonderful opportunity if Texas Tech could get a medical school, mainly because the West Texas area was vastly underserved medically. There was about one doctor for every 1,700 people out in West Texas, and in the metropolitan areas, there was like one doctor for 500 people. So we were grossly deficient in doctors, and I had felt that having a medical school in Lubbock would help alleviate that problem. So I went to Austin a couple of times and testified at some of the Senate and House hearings about the need for a medical school in West Texas. Finally, the bill was passed by Preston Smith. He was governor at the time in 1969. And then after that, there was a recruitment process in place to recruit doctors to be the faculty. So they recruited enough doctors to handle the first 2 years, but they didn't have enough clinical faculty for the third and fourth years of medical school. The third year is when the students start seeing patients. The first 2 years is more academic bookwork stuff. And then they, at the same time they enrolled that first class of freshmen in 1972, they also took in a 25 class of third-year students. So they didn't have clinical faculty. They came to me again about asking the medical staff of Methodist Hospital to serve as the clinical faculty for those third and fourth-year students. And then they didn't have a chair of Department of Surgery. They asked if I would be the chair of surgery. To get the school started with talent for those third and fourth year students. Well, I was already real busy. I was reluctant to do it, but I thought, well, maybe I can do this for three or 4 months till we get somebody full-time over there. I went to two partners I had at the time, asked them if they would help support me in that, and they agreed to do so. So I accepted the position as chairman of the surgery department for the first medical school class and kept that role for 3 years before I was able to recruit somebody to take it over. But it was also a very challenging time. The UMC hadn't even been built yet. It wasn't open until 1978. So for 6 years, 5 or 6 years, Methodist Hospital served as the main teaching hospital for the medical students, and the medical staff of Methodist Hospital, all private practice physicians, served as the clinical faculty for those students. So that's how that got started, and of course it's grown also enormously over the years and has become recognized as one of the finest medical schools in the country.
Yes, it has. Who are some of the best administrators and the best professionals that you worked with over your time here?
Well, the first guy I recall that so impressed me was a neurosurgeon here. He was here when I got here in '62. His name was Jack Dunn. He was a neurosurgeon, and in the early days at the Methodist Hospital, they had a video board that showed, but with your name on it. When you checked into the hospital with your tag, it put your name up on the board that let everybody know you were in the hospital. And when you left in the evening, you clicked out and your name went off. He was the only guy whose name was on that board when I got there early in the morning, and the only guy whose name was still there when I left. So, but he was a very, very good surgeon. Had the reputation of having expertise in all phases of neurosurgery, including brain surgery. And so that was the first person that really made an impact on me. Another one was Dr. Jack Selby. He was a thoracic surgeon. He didn't do any heart surgery, although he did do some heart surgery without the heart-lung machine. I helped him with it. But he was trained in Boston, and I worked for a few months with him when I first came. But I give him credit for actually doing, if you want to just say heart surgery, he did some of these mitral valves on a pumping heart. Mitral valve is one of the heart valves, and it gets scarred in. The leaflets get scarred from rheumatic fever as a child, and the valve won't open and close properly. And I helped him with the beating heart open up the auricle and do what's called a finger fracture. Actually poke your finger down in and break up that scar tissue and make the valve work again. So that was the second guy. And then I guess later on in my career, Don Bricker, of course, very talented surgeon. And but those three figures stand out in my mind professionally. Administrators, Bill Poteet was here when I came. Actually, George Brewer was before him. George was the first administrator when I first arrived. He was so totally dedicated to that hospital and worked tirelessly day and night. And after several years, he retired. And then Bill Poteet came in from El Paso, and he was there for many years. And those two really started up the Methodist Hospital as we know it today.
The cardiology practice here, as you said, now encompasses 3 campuses: the Heart Hospital, Methodist or Covenant, and also UMC.
Correct.
I have no idea how many surgeons you're talking about or how many cardiologists, but it's got to be.
Well, dozens, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know either the exact number. Now then, one thing that's influenced cardiac surgery in recent years has been the evolution of stents that the cardiologist put in with a catheter. Prior to the stents, everybody that had a obstructing lesion in the coronary artery had surgery because that was the only alternative. But then, about 20 years ago, the cardiologist, when they do a heart cath and identify a lesion, are able to put in a stent which dilates up the obstructing artery, and that stent is left in. And this has become a panacea for treatment of coronary artery disease that needs surgery. And this has reduced the volume drastically by the number of cardiac surgical cases that one does, because many of these lesions can be managed without surgery, and that's been a boon too for patients because you don't have to undergo that horrific cardiac surgery.
True. Thank you, Dr. Salem. We'll take one more break here. I want to remind our listeners that all of our episodes, including this show, are available on demand in our station app, also on our website at classical1057.org. Stay with us. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Robert Salem. We've talked a lot, Dr. Salem, about your work with cardiovascular programs here in Lubbock, but you were also very esteemed in general surgery. Let's talk a little bit about your years with SWAT and your colleagues there.
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, when I came to town in 1962, we weren't doing any heart surgery, so I was focused on all phases of general surgery. And I started out by myself, independent, private solo practice at Methodist Hospital. And I got busy real fast. I had a lot of referring doctors in the area that didn't do surgery that I knew from years back in Sudan and college, and they started referring patients in. So I got real busy real fast. And after 5 or 6 years, I brought in my first partner, Jerry Sturman, and he and I were a two-man group for a period of time. Then Jerry had some illnesses and had to retire. So the next guy we recruited, we needed some more help, was Ted Allen. He's a Lubbock boy, raised here. He also had trained with Dr. DeBakey, so that was a good fit for me. I knew of his training, his experience, and his expertise. Then Dr. Allen, Ted, came out and joined me and Jerry, and when Jerry phased out completely, we added Teb Thames, also a Lubbock guy, and then later on Tim West. So that was Salem, Allen, Thames, and West, the first four. But the nurses at the hospital got tired of writing all those names out, and they decided to condense that and to move West from 4 fourth to second to make a W, and then Allen and Thames. So Salem, West, Allen and Thames. That's how the name got started, and I give the nurses credit for that.
Fairly popular TV show back in the day too, I think.
Yeah, it's a real easy name to remember and one of us stayed up at the hospital on 24-hour shifts, so all nurses knew we were readily available for whatever emergency might come up, and they just say consult SWAT, and that took care of it rather quickly.
We were talking a little bit off air a minute ago about just the future of medicine. I remember, I think it's remarkable just in your lifespan, the concept of doing open heart surgery on someone goes from an unthinkable situation to something that's not routine, but occurs on a day-to-day basis, let alone, like you said, to work with stents. What do you see as the future?
Well, I think it's an evolving thing. I think that for the time being, probably things are going to stay pretty much as they are with heart surgery, open heart surgery being possible. However, techniques are developing now where one can go in and put in a heart valve with a catheter. A catheter is inserted into the groin up into the pulmonary artery, and a diseased artery is not replaced, but the new valve is placed in there with a catheter. So that's the beginning of I think an era where we're going to see less invasive surgery. And over time, I think more and more surgery will be done that way with less invasive techniques. Another thing in general surgery is when I trained, everything was done with a long, big incision on the abdomen. And laparoscopic surgery has replaced that. That's where patients can receive surgery now with instruments, long instruments, and a video screen, and the instruments replace the surgeon's hands, and they can maneuver those probes inside and perform surgery very successfully now without an open incision, just 3 or 4 little half-inch holes there where you put the scopes in. So more and more surgery. In fact, I talked to a resident in surgery training here. I said, how many open gallbladder surgeries do you do each 3 months? He said, I haven't done any. All of gallbladder surgery mostly is done through this laparoscopic technique, and patients frequently go home the same night. Whereas when I performed a gallbladder operation 25 years ago, I had a 7-inch incision on the abdomen. The patient was in the hospital for a week, and they hurt for months. So that's a big improvement over what the type of surgery I did when I was in training and practice. So I think those two things, and then there's the robot. That's a refinement of the laparoscopic. Robotic surgery is taking hold, and so we're seeing a lot of advances there. Well, that'll have how much application that'll have in the cardiac area, I'm not sure, but certainly technology is going to change medicine and surgery in the future.
Yes, it will, and the advances are nothing less than truly remarkable. You also come from a generation of doctors where I remember Dr. Bricker saying that the two of you would sometimes trade out sleeping in the hall just to be near your patients. What advice would you have for a young doctor today?
Well, I think first of all, I get asked questions from possible medical students all the time about becoming a doctor. And the first thing I tell them is that it's something, as it was with me, more of a calling. I said, you don't go into medicine because of the prestige or the financial considerations or anything else. You've got to really want to take care of patients and do good for patients and have that service heart. And, if you don't have that, you might ought to think about something else. But I think that's the main thing for me it was, and for my advice to students, and of course, as I interview prospective medical students, I think a well-rounded individual. When I was trying to apply for medical school, I had to take all these science courses. Nowadays, it's a more variety is felt to be helpful to round out an individual. But I think the main thing is that drive to want to help people.
What's your legacy? What do you want your legacy to be for this community?
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but I guess my legacy will be a person, a surgeon who gave his life in service to others.
Well said, and very true. For any of our listeners that want to learn more about Dr. Salem's life, I'd recommend his book. It's called Sandstorms and Surgeries, written back, I think, in 2010? 2010? 2010. Also, there's a very fine documentary that you can find on PBS websites or on YouTube. The documentary is called Salem, the Heart of West Texas. Dr. Salem, we very much appreciate you taking time to share your story with our listeners. You're always welcome here. Thank you for your significant contributions to our community, and thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so very much, Gordon. I'm happy to have shared my experiences with you and others.
Thanks again for coming. Appreciate you listening today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Archive West Texas.